Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Mia Burke, and I am Program Manager with Hanford Challenge. Hanford Challenge is a nonprofit based in Seattle that focuses on cleanup of the Hanford nuclear site and supports insiders, workers, and whistleblowers who have issues that are not being addressed. This is the 14th webinar of our Nuclear Waste Scholar Series. We started the series to inspire action and involvement with Hanford cleanup. Over the course of the series, we've invited movers, shakers, and thinkers to share groundbreaking scholarship, art, research, and experience working with nuclear waste. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Ariana Tibon-Kilma. Ariana works as a commissioner at the Republic of the Marshall Islands National Nuclear Commission. Ariana helped develop a nuclear legacy curriculum for the Republic of the Marshall Islands public schools system and co-taught a Nuclear Issues in the Pacific course at the College of the Marshall Islands. She holds a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Ariana is a descendant of survivors of the catastrophic Bravo shot that was detonated in the Marshall Islands. She lives with her family in Majuro, where she works with students and youth to encourage engagement in nuclear dialogue. Just as a heads up, Ariana's presentation will be about 50 minutes long, and we will leave time after the presentation for Q&A. If you can't stick around for the whole time, feel free to leave. We will be recording the presentation and we'll share a link of the recording with everyone that registered. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ariana. I'll pass it to you now to talk about your work.
Hi, thank you, Mia, and thank you everyone for joining this morning. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. It is an absolute honor to be here this morning. It's actually 7 a.m. here in the Marshall Islands, and I'm very honored to be a part of your Scholar Series to bring the stories of the Marshallese people, of my families, to you, and just share what we know about the nuclear legacy and some of the challenges that we, the Marshallese people, are facing now because of the nuclear legacy and the lack of knowledge of this legacy. I wanted to briefly discuss the National Nuclear Commission, where I work, along with a history of the nuclear testing period as much as I could before I could get to the challenges that we're facing today. And so the NNC, or National Nuclear Commission, was established in 2017. We were established to coordinate the government's need to address ongoing and unresolved issues that arise from the nuclear testing period. And when the NNC was established, it's a 3-commissioner body. Along with the 3 commissioners, there's a secretary, the admin and physical officer, and then there's the education and public awareness director. So there's only 6 of us there at the office, and as you can see, there is a lot of work ahead of us and a lot more to learn about the testing period. In this photo here, we have people of Rongelap Atoll in 1985 when they were resettled from their home into a different island after living in their home for 28 years. And I'll go more into that as we go into the presentation. When the NNC was established, the 3 commissioners and the secretary at that time had held stakeholder consultations. They met with various people throughout the community, from leaders, youth, teachers, and just as many survivors, of course, and local governments that are heavily involved with the nuclear testing legacy. And they tried to put together a strategy for justice, and they identified these 5 pillars as the core needs to address in order to achieve justice. And the first one is compensation. Second one is healthcare. Third is environment remediation. fourth is national capacity building, and the fifth is education and awareness. And I will also be going more into each of the pillars as I conduct this presentation. And in the photo here, we have a photo of a little girl in Kwajalein Atoll just a few days after being exposed to the catastrophic Castle Bravo shot. In 1947, a year after the nuclear testing had already begun in the Marshall Islands, the United Nations established the Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands. And under this trusteeship, the Marshall Islands, along with 10 other Pacific countries today, were under the United States, and the United States administered this trusteeship, and they were supposed to protect the inhabitants against the loss of lands and resources, along with many other responsibilities. However, in a way, the United States did not protect the people of the Marshall Islands, neither did it protect our lands and resources. And all of this was conducted with the approval of the United Nations. From 1946 to 1958, the Marshall Islands was a part of what was known as the Pacific Proving Grounds. And over the span of 12 years, the US had conducted a total of 67 known nuclear devices. There could have been more, but we only know of 67 of these devices. And throughout this testing period, the communities had to be relocated continuously. And so in these photos here, you see the people of Bikini Atoll during their first resettlement in 1946. In this photo over here, I'm not sure if you could see my cursor, but you could see the cameras there and the people sitting, the community members sitting in the corner here. And if you have a chance and you would look at this footage, you can maybe just YouTube people of Bikini's resettlement 1946. You could see that when the commander asked them, "Are you willing to give up your land in order for the US to test to conduct these tests for the good of mankind and to end all wars?" The people responded in unison, "Emman," which means okay. And they had said that they had done that. It was such a scripted line that although they were debating among themselves at that time, they eventually had to say they eventually had to agree to give up their land, because they were also afraid when the US military had arrived. They had arrived with all of their big ships and tankers, and so it was a very intimidating moment for them. And this scene where they all respond and say they are willing to go, they had probably 40 takes on the scene just to make sure that it all looked like they were okay with it. And their leader at that time, his name was Kejibugi Juda, he responded and said, "We will go believing everything is in the hands of God," being that our communities are so, the foundation of our communities is our Christianity and our trust in the Lord. And I forgot to mention the photo earlier. If it's okay, I'll just go back. This photo when the people of Rongalap had moved to Mediato, they were constructing their homes, and the first infrastructure that they had built when they relocated them was the church. And all the community members had lived in the church, and at that time they were living in the church, they started building all the families' homes. And so you could see there's a lot of movement here. The people of Bikini were first moved to Rongruk Atoll, which is a nearby atoll that was previously and had always been uninhabited for many reasons. And it was not until they had lived there that they had realized why this island or this atoll was uninhabited. The fish around the lagoon was all cicatera fish, and they were not able to grow any crops on that land. And oftentimes, when the men would sail out, they would be gone for a number of 3 to 4 days because they would go out as far as they could on their canoes to fish, to catch fish that was good for them to eat. And so during this time, the people of Bikini had suffered severe famine when the US military had gone back to pick them up from Rongrut 2 years later. They were very thin. They recalled it as a time where they had really suffered tremendously. And so, anyways, for the people of Anahuac, where the testing was also in, so there was two atolls where they had done the testing. The first one was Bikini Atoll, and the second was Anahuac Atoll. And they had also moved the people of Anahuac from Anahuac to a nearby atoll known as Wujilang. And in Wujilang Atoll, the people had the problem with Wujilang Atoll was that it was infested with rats, and people had to construct little boxes for their babies to sleep in because the rats were just trying to nibble at their toes. And it was a very challenging time for the people of Anahuac because they could not they had also suffered starvation because the rats were eating everything. And like up to the coconuts, they couldn't even consume the coconuts because the rats would eat the coconuts as well. And so there was many different ways where they tried to eliminate the rats, and one of them was they said, okay, for every rat's tail that's brought to the administrators, they would give them like a little bit of compensation, like maybe 2 cents or something, because they were just trying to kill all the rats. And it was a big problem for the people of Anahuac. And for my families who were from Rongalap, they had initially moved them to a nearby atoll, which is known as Lai, but there are declassified document reports where the US high-ranking officials at that time were saying, well, we can move this community back to Rongalap. It's okay if they would be in the danger zone. Basically, that's the language was a little bit more complicated than that, but translating it to simple words, they basically said it was okay for them to be in the danger zone. And for my other families on Wudarag Atoll, they were moved for only a brief period of time shortly after being exposed to the Castle Bravo shot. They were only away from their home for 3 months and returned without proper cleanup of their atoll. On the morning of March 1st, 1954, this was when the infamous Castle Bravo shot was tested. It turned out to be a total of 15 megatons, which is 1,000 times stronger than Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined, that the yield from those two testing was 35 kilotons. And I am not really good at math, but I think in 1 megaton there's 1,000 kilotons or something. Anyways, you can tell that it was way more than what was tested in, or what the bombs that were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the information I have on here, where the cloud had reached 47,000 feet in 1 minute, was taken from US reports. And so in less than 10 minutes, the cloud from this test had reached 132,000 feet. The bottom photo here, the moving photo, and the top left photo are actual footages of the Castle Bravo shot test. And the fallout from this cloud had reached my families, not just in Rongalap and not just in Wudarag, but throughout the Marshall Islands. However, we were told when, and I'll go into this when we discuss the Compact of Free Association, but our leaders were told that there are only 4 atolls that are affected by the nuclear testing. Um, anyways, it was estimated if you calculate the single Castle Bravo shot and the Hiroshima um, bomb and Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs, it is estimated that in order for the yield to be equivalent to what was tested here, you would have to test the Hiroshima bomb 1.6 times every single day for a span of 12 years. And so it just you could tell that's a lot. And this bomb vaporized many small islands in Bikini Atoll. This was tested in Bikini Atoll. And I am here to share with you some of the experiences of my family members based off of interview recordings that I had listened to during my years in college. Which was not too long ago, but it was not until I was in college that I had realized that this had happened and my families had stories to share, and because it just was not taught in schools. And so on the morning of March 2nd, 1954, when the community members, specifically on Ronglab, had woken up, many of them were very ill. They were feeling very nauseous. They were feeling like they had severe headache. They could not, a lot of them were not able to move, and it was only a few young boys who were strong enough. They were going around um, giving coconut drinks to the communities, to the households, because the water in their catchments had turned yellow, and they were just trying to drink or just to keep hydrated because they knew that something was wrong. By this time, their skin, because the day prior on March 1st, some of the children were playing under the fallout, not realizing that this was not safe to be under. And some of our men who were out fishing, they were exposed to the fallout. And so the evening of March 1st, when they were trying to consume their dinners, they said they recall that it felt like they were munching on sand. And again, these are all from interview reports and their testimonies. They felt that there was sand in their eyes. The next morning, when they were all very ill, their skin had started to develop all of these skin burns. Some of them you could see here. They recall it as when their skin was itching and they would try to scratch it, the skin would peel right off, and their hair started to fall off. Some of their fingernails had started to turn black or had black stripes in their fingernails. And it was just a very um, horrific time for my families at that time, who were not aware of what was happening. And I recently learned from one of my colleagues, who is the daughter of one of the exposed people of Ronglap, that prior to the testing, the U.S. military would go to Ronglap and um, they would have movie nights where they would show movies of snow and kids playing in the snow. And so when the fallout arrived in Ronglap, the children thought it was snow and they went out to play under that snow. Anyways, this is just a few of the many different immediate effects and reactions that they were feeling when the plane and the ships came to evacuate them. And they only evacuated the pregnant women and the elderly on the plane, but the rest of them were evacuated on the ship. When they were on the ship, the U.S. military asked the communities to strip naked and a lot of them stood naked on the ship. They had not they did not have a separate boat for males and a separate one for females. They were all on the same boat, and they were hosed down with what they recall as a pressure washer, or they would say it felt like they were hosed down with a fire hose. And they were given a t-shirt, a soldier's t-shirt and underwear to wear as they journeyed to Kwajalein Atoll. And in Kwajalein Atoll, we will now be discussing Project 4.1, which was the top secret medical lab study on the effects of radiation on human beings. And on March 9th, 1954, Project 4.1 scientists who we thought were doctors arrived on Kwajalein, and on March 11th, the project officially began without consent from the people of Rongelap and Wudaruk. And Kwajalein Atoll, for those who don't know, is still there is still U.S. military presence on Kwajalein Atoll till this day. It is still a military base, and at that time, it was used to conduct the Project 4.1 testing. And this was during the time of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. During this time, when they were living in a fenced off area on Kwajalein Atoll, urine and blood tests were collected daily. And along with this, they had to bathe in the lagoon and scrub their burns in the lagoon with soap and salt water 3 times daily. And again, these are either from reports, the US reports, or from our people's testimonies. They had to scrub their burns 3 times a day in the lagoon. And one of the very humiliating parts of this was that when, for example, when it was a woman's turn to go to the lagoon to bathe and scrub their burns, the translator was also one of them. He was a young Marshallese man who just returned from school at that time, and he knew English to be able to translate for them with the US military personnel. And they recall it as a very humiliating time because they would have to come around with a Geiger counter as the woman stood along the beach shore, and they would measure the radiation on their bodies, every single one of them. And the young Marshallese man had to tell them, it's not enough, you need to scrub some more. He was translating for the military personnel, and he too was feeling very ashamed, but he had to tell them the orders that they were telling them. And so anyways, this happened 3 times a day for a period of time as they were collecting urine and blood tests. And along with this, they had brought in people from a nearby atoll that was considered to be not exposed. And this group of people were considered the control group. And this control group, every single one of them had matched the age and gender of the exposed group community members. So if we had a 37-year-old female in the exposed group, they had brought a 37-year-old female to be in the control group. And today they refer to this control group, because it still exists today, by the way, they refer to this control group as the comparison group. And I'm not too sure. The NNC, the National Nuclear Commission, and the government, we're not too sure what's going on with the Department of Energy, because they're still conducting monitoring on our people's health. But anyways, it's very complicated. Other test subjects that were included throughout all these studies were chickens, pigs, sheep, mice, dogs, coral reef, trees, and all of that. But human test subjects were included as well, and they so happened to be my family members. Here I have a few of the purposes that were reported in Project 4.1 reports. you can see number 4 here. I mean, this is just 4 of many reports, but number 4, I think it's very unnecessary. But the the, the purpose of Project 4.1, according to the scientists at that time, was they wanted to provide information to ongoing studies on absorption rates, elimination processes, and other questions of interest to the national security and military defense of the United States. There is no language in there that considers the Marshallese people or their human rights. And so a lot of human rights were violated during this Project 4.1 and nuclear testing period. But I don't know, it's sometimes when I think of it, I don't understand who would have the heart to even propose such studies on human beings. And I forgot to say, from what I've read, the control group that was brought in to measure, to compare their how their bodies were reacting differently with the exposed group, they had been somehow injected with radioactive isotopes. And I still have a lot more to learn about what that means, but they were injected with radioactive isotopes because now the US was studying how the body reacts to being exposed to radiation and how the body reacts to being injected with radiation. You can see in the photos here, they all have the number 67 in their photos, but before 60, and this was the year 1967 that these photos were taken. Before the number 67, you could see they each have their own numbers, and they were referred to their clinical numbers during this time. And even a child who was in their mother's womb had received a clinical number while they were still in their mother's womb when the testing, when the Bravo shot had gone off and they had started the Project 4.1 study. This is a photo of children of Rongelap and Wudurag that were on Kwajalein Atoll during the testing period, where the Project 4.1 period. You could see most of them have lost their hair by now. When they went to evacuate them, a lot of them had already started to lose patches of their hair, and over the span of some time that all the hair came off. But there was a warning that people should no longer be exposed to radiation for at least 12 years, but the US did not think so, and they actually had returned the people of Rongelap specifically 3 years after being exposed, 3 years after the testing. Anyways, along with the many different reasons why the scientists wanted to do these studies, I listed the 2 here that I thought were very unnecessary. I mean, the whole project I personally believe was very unnecessary, but at this time they wanted to study the people's teeth, so they would extract healthy tooth from the people just to study how radiation affects those that tooth. And they also wanted to study bone marrow, and so there would be times where they would extract bone marrow from either the children or the elderly or just anybody in this community. And there is a testimony of a woman who shared that her son was a year old at the time of the testing, and throughout his lifetime, where he lived to 17 years old, and he died of leukemia. Throughout his lifetime, the US had treated him literally as a test subject, and they had extracted various tissues from various parts of his body since he was a child all the way until to his dying bed. And that's just one of many stories. We also have the stories of the many women who were giving birth to what they were called jellyfish babies, and I will also be going into that. And so in 1957, the United States announced that it was safe for the people of Rongelap to return. And in reports, we later learned that they had wanted to return the people of Rongelap. Um, sorry, it's just so frustrating. They had wanted to return the people of Rongelap so they can test how radiation evolves in the food chain and in the environment. And so they wanted the people of Rongelap to be further exposed to radiation. And now it was through the environment. And when the people of Rongelap went back to Rongelap in 1957, at this time, it was not just the exposed group anymore. There was more of them because during their time away from Rongelap, they eventually ended up here in Majuro Atoll. And when notice came that it was safe to go home, it was a very joyous time for them. And they said, okay, well, whoever wants to come with us, we're going back to Rongelap. And so a lot of them had brought family members from other atolls who wanted to go with them to Rongelap. And so now we had an originally exposed group and a new control group. And this new control group would be the group that they would monitor how their body reacts to ingesting radiation through the food chain. And so, and it's in the reports, they wanted to see how radiation travels in the environment. And at that time, they were each given different, I guess, clinic cards. And I always forget which color was assigned to which group, but one card was red and the other card was green. And they were the one, like, for example, the red card was given to the originally exposed Rongelap community members, and the green card was given to the new ones who were now going to be exposed um, to the food, radioactive food. I don't know what the term is. But anyways, in the photo here, the bottom left photo, you could see these are people of Rongelap exhuming their loved ones who had passed away during the 3 years that they were on Majuro Atoll to be taken home to Rongelap for proper burial in their homeland. And in the photos here, this is when they were taking them back to Rongelap. This top right photo here was taken from one of the crew members' blogs that I had found online, and he had expressed his frustration that they did this movie night and they played a movie for the people, and instead of playing a family friendly movie, they played a wartime movie showcasing the US, all their weapons of mass destruction and their power. And so the crew member on the ship alone, he was just very disappointed that this was not a family friendly movie to be playing to a community that was going back to their home after being away because of weapons of mass destruction. And by the time the people had gone back to Rongelap, there was a hematology laboratory that was built there for them, and again to continue the monitoring of the people's health. And I forgot to mention, I'm so sorry, my thoughts are just all over the place. But when the people had been going through all of that pain during the first few weeks, the initial pain of the nausea and the headache and the hair falling off, I forgot to mention that none of them were given pain medication, or they were not given Tylenol. They just had to endure that pain while the scientists tested or monitored how their bodies were reacting. And so, anyways, they had a hematology laboratory set up for them on Rongelap, and it was the same for the people of Wuduruk. And there was a ship that came around annually to conduct their annual blood test, and it was a very confusing time for everyone. Our families thought that they were being treated But it was not until later on that they realized they were only being monitored. There was no form of treatment throughout this whole process. And you can see this doctor here. This is a photo on Woodruck Atoll. His name was Dr. Robert Kennard. He is checking the woman's thyroids. There's shortly after the exposure to radiation, many Marshallese people suffered. One of the most immediate effects were they suffered thyroid infection and thyroid disease and thyroid cancer, and they had a lot of them had their thyroids removed. And so, anyways, Dr. Robert Kennard was, I'm showing him here because our people thought that he was here to treat us, and he was sort of a savior to us. He would oftentimes um oftentimes take some of our people to New York, um because he, you know, I'm not sure what he told them, but they thought they were going to New York for treatment and for, to get special care. But he was taking Marshallese people to New York and hosting barbecues to have them on display and invite his friends over to showcase his subjects. And it was not until later on that our people had realized that this doctor was not actually treating us. And my great grandfather, his name was Nelson Anjain, he later became one of the leaders of the people of Rongelap. And he wrote a letter to Dr. Robert Kennard and told him not to return to Rongelap because they realized that he has not been true to what he was telling them this whole time. It was a very brave thing for my great grandfather at that time because nobody was standing up to these scientists or these, U.S. military or U.S. personnel. And the other thing is, because of the uh, mis, I guess, misinterpretation of this doctor, we have a few families here that name their sons either Robert or Kennard from this doctor. And when we talk about it today, they're very surprised, and they're just like, yeah, we remember, and we don't know what he did. He was basically just coming to check our throats or taking samples, but he did not really provide any treatment to us. And these are just a few photos of the diseases and birth defects that our women had been experiencing with their children. Oftentimes what they would give birth to what they recall as jellyfish babies. And by the term the term jellyfish babies was coined because a lot of the times when these babies were born, and you can see these are the more recent photos, the during the trusteeship, when the woman had give birth, some of them had reported it to trusteeship officials, but a lot of them did not. And the few that did, they did take photos of their children. They recall it as jellyfish because the baby would be born without any limbs, without any head. It would just be the human flesh. They could see the heart beating, they could see the intestines, they could see the blood flowing, but they were not sure. They were not sure what was happening. And oftentimes women were not telling their own sisters that they had given birth to a jellyfish babies. It was a very humiliating time for us at that time because what we were told by the officials was that if you're giving birth to babies with birth defects, it's because you were practicing incest. And that was not true. And so we had families where sisters were having either 7 to 8 or sometimes more than 10 miscarriages, or carrying the baby to term, and it would come out looking like grapes. And they say they would go through the entire 9 months of pregnancy feeling nauseous and all the symptoms of pregnancy, and when the child would be born, it would be born looking like a vine of grapes. Other times a child would be born looking like an octopus. It was just many different types, and it was very new to our people at that time. And because of the humiliation, sometimes what they would not tell their family members, and they would just bury their babies alone, um, without telling anyone. And I'm sure it's not just in the Marshall Islands. I'm sure in, I guess, universally all across the world, when there is a death in the family, we all come together to grieve the loss of a loved one and to provide support to the immediate family that lost their loved ones. But during this time, we were grieving alone. The mothers were grieving alone because they were too ashamed to share with their sisters or their aunties. There were a few who were sharing their stories, and they had allowed for the trusteeship officials to take photos of their children. And coincidentally, when the trusteeship had dissolved and the Marshall Islands was no longer under the United States, the office building burned down where all the photos were in. So what we have are more recent photos of these children. Some of the children in these photos were born to parents that were not exposed, but their grandparents were exposed, and some of them were born to parents who were exposed to the radiation. And this is a photo of the Runut Dome. It was constructed on Eniwetok Atoll. Just to show you like a scale, these small dots here are people on the Runut Dome. Shortly after construction, it was constructed between the years 1977 to 1979. The U.S. had contracted over 4,000 personnel, and it was a mix of military personnel and U.S. civilians to construct this dome. And what had happened was they had in an attempt to clean up Eniwetok Atoll, they scraped off the topsoil from this atoll where all the plutonium from Hanford, the plutonium that was created in Hanford was tested here in Eniwetok and in Bikini. And they had scraped off all of the topsoil and put it into this dome, and they just capped it with the cement cap. I would like to note that the bottom of this dome is completely porous. There was no foundation or base. It was just a crater at first because this was initially a bomb and there was water in it, and they just drained out the water and put in all the topsoil and any other radioactive material into the dome, and then they just capped it. And in today's meetings with the Department of Energy, what they tell our government is we should not be worried about what's in the dome because there's only 1% radiation in the dome. And when the tide is high, the tide in the dome is high. When the tide is low, the tide is low because it's completely in communication with the water. And we, the people of the RMI, the government, we were not sure of what, we're still not sure what's completely in the dome, what was in there, but it was not until recently, during COVID actually, that we had started communicating with the cleanup workers of this dome. A lot of the U.S. civilians and U.S. military personnel that were in charge of cleaning this dome, and they had shared a lot of information that the U.S. did not disclose to us previously. For example, they had shared that they had brought in 130 tons of radioactive waste from Nevada test site to be dumped in the Eniwetok Lagoon. They had also shared that throughout this island, there was crypts where they just built, these crypts, they just put in more radioactive waste in and just covered it up because there was no more space in this dome. And one of these cleanup workers shared that his job at this time they were constructing the dome was to mix cement. That was his job. He was just there to mix cement, and they were told to just rush and try to get rid of the plutonium as much as they could. And he shared with us that one of the ways where you could try to slow down plutonium is to mix it with cement. And he had actually shared that if you go to Runut Island and see a lot of big bunkers, those were just built because, and those are just plutonium bunkers. We just mixed cement and just built these infrastructures there to try to control the plutonium that that was there. And so anyways, it's the Runa Dome is still here till this day, and because of the lack of knowledge, a lot of Marshallese, if you show this photo to them, they will not know that this is in one of our atolls. Okay, and I'll discuss briefly the Compact of Free Association and the Nuclear Claims Tribunal. In 1986, the RMI and US had agreed to a Compact of Free Association. There is a specific provision in there that says that the US would provide $150 million for past, present, and future damages. And should there be any changes arising after this 150 million, then the RMI government was entitled to submit a change circumstances petition to the United States, listing all these change circumstances. And after the change circumstances provision, there was another provision that said that the RMI could not take any of the US officials or contractors to court, or the US government to court, for any reason relating to the nuclear testing period. And so, although this photo here was taken in 1957, this was the first payment made to the people of Bikini. Later on, when the compact was established or signed, they had they then established trust funds for each of the 4 atolls, and it was a very flawed agreement. And for the change circumstances, when our people had submitted, okay, my 2-year-old is up. It's now 7:48 a.m. here. So when our people had submitted a change circumstances petition back in 2001, the response back from the US administration was that our claims had no basis. And so anyways, that alone itself is frustrating. But with the compact, there was a nuclear claims tribunal. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, in exchange for the US to provide the compensation and all of that, in exchange for that, the RMI has given the United States strategic denial rights for our lands and our waters and our airspace. And so okay, next slide. After the compact was signed and the Nuclear Claims Tribunal was established, it was not until 1993 Department of Energy's Openness Initiative that the US government announced we could request documents. And so when our government requested for documents to be declassified from the nuclear testing period, we learned that there was more than 4 atolls that were affected by the nuclear testing. And you can see in this photo here, the left is all the different atolls that were affected. I don't think here. So this is more than what we were told, and this is just one page out of so many different 1,000 pages that were given to us. Also, a good number of these pages are completely blank and stamped deleted. And now we get to the generational gap in knowledge. I just want to share for example, for my story, all of that I had just presented to you, I had no clue. I just had no idea that all of that happened. And it was not until I left home and studied in the US that I started doing research on my own country's history. And I realized when I was in college that, okay, the only way for me to pass all of my classes and to ace all of my papers is for me to write about home, because I think I would be the expert here and not my professors. And so that's when I started doing research. But growing up, we were taught that the issues that we should be worried about are diabetes, hypertension, substance abuse, pollution. We were not told to worry about any of the effects of nuclear testing and focus on how to address these effects. And so In 2019, 73 years since the first bomb was tested in the Marshall Islands, the National Nuclear Commission partnered with the Ministry of Education to develop a curriculum to teach our children about the testing period. And the issue that we're having now with the curriculum, the challenge is that our teachers are having a very, very hard time teaching this curriculum to their students because the teachers alone are not aware of this history. And you can see in this photo here, these are photos of teachers. In the writing it says nuclear testing violates. And so they're, this is something so very new to our teachers. And although we provide them, we at the NNC, we try to provide them a list of resources or, documents for them to read. Here in the Marshall Islands, especially in the outer islands where there's no internet and we don't have that many teachers, if you walk into a classroom, you would have one teacher, and that teacher is teaching first to fourth grade or first to third grade. And that one teacher is teaching all 8 to 12 different subjects. And it's so very hard to have the teachers just focus on the nuclear legacy when they also have to focus on geography and science and math and all English and all the other subjects in the curriculum. And so it's been quite challenging. The curriculum was piloted in 2020. We are now in 2023 and it is still being piloted. It's not in the national curriculum yet throughout all the schools in the RMI. It's still within 12 schools because there are so many challenges in trying to that we're still trying to address with um, the teachers creating information or creating activities, creating work plans. And so we will get there someday. I am hopeful. Another one of the challenges I wanted to raise because of this generational gap in knowledge, because this history was not talked about. It was not taught in schools, like I mentioned. It's not talked about at home. I did not really, I don't recall ever having a discussion with any of my grandparents about this period in time until now that I am doing my own research and asking them questions. So when we ask the questions, they are willing to answer, but it's not something that they would just bring up and talk about. And there is no national database. We are still working on it. The RMI government is still trying to create a national database to compile all of the information or as much information that we know about the nuclear testing period so that our scholars and our students throughout the world could have something to cite and refer to when they're doing their research. But just to share, when we were first established, we held a public information session in 2019, and we had the public there, and we had an elected member of parliament ask us, why should our government even be spending money on your office? Our government should be focused and worried about things such as climate change. Why should we even worry about the nuclear issues? Because the nuclear issues are a thing of the past and we should move forward from this, not realizing that a lot of the issues that we're living with today, a lot of the health and environmental issues stem from the nuclear testing period. And for example, because we're not aware of the nuclear history, a lot of our government ministries and agencies do not include nuclear issues in any of their strategies or their work plans. And so, for example, the Marine Resources Authority or the Environmental Protection Authority, the Ministry of Health, they are not they don't have specific programs that would either monitor radiation in the environment or a specific database for cancer that could possibly be induced by radiation exposure. Even in our cancer report, when our office had requested the ministry to share the cancer report, a good percent, like I think it was like 13% of our cancers come from tobacco, and another percent was from obesity. There was no reference in our cancer report that, eh, I mean, although it's very difficult to tell whether cancer is from radiation, but there's no at least acknowledgement that, some of these could be possibly from radiation exposure. Anyways, I think I'm out of time. I uh, I will discuss more if you have any questions.